Good morning. This is the Great Basin prescribed fire and smoke transport briefing for Monday, October 31st. Look at the past 7 days. We see that most of the precipitation on the lighter side, but some moderate precipitation in parts of the Idaho Central Mountains and the higher terrain of Utah. Otherwise, fairly light precipitation across the rest of the area and basically bone dry across the western third to western half of Nevada. A look at the 14 days indicates that we did have steadier, heavier precipitation the week previous with some locally heavier amounts of 3/4 of an inch to an inch and a half. We see the dark greens and yellows in much of our higher terrain areas. But even in the far west, they still stayed mostly dry. So when we look at our 100-hour fuels, you can see they've dried out quite a bit in the mid to upper single digits here in the gold. Um, in the low teens in the yellow, and even some pockets locally drier here in the red, but still quite moist up in the higher terrain of Idaho, where 100-hour fuels are in the upper teens to near 20%. Now look at the heavier 1,000-hour fuels, and you can see again they've dried out quite a bit across western portions of the Great Basin in the upper single digits, very dry for this time of year. They still retain a lot of moisture in parts of the Idaho Central Mountains, especially across the western half, where moistures are in the upper teens. Elsewhere, they're probably near seasonable levels, 1,000-hour fuels in the 11 to 15% range in the yellow. Now, the satellite imagery shows weak high pressure still over the region, kind of nosing in from Nevada into far southern Idaho and into Wyoming. But that's being pushed southwards as a very deep low pressure area and a very strong cold front are starting to push southwards across the northwestern portion of the United States. So we see that cold front very well defined, that dark green area and that low pressure area continuing to push south. Still in the drier air mass across western and southern portions of the Great Basin. You see our 7-day fire potential outlook where we still have some moderate dryness across the far west. Look at the minimum humidities, and you can see below 30% or so across far southwest Idaho, otherwise in the upper teens to mid 20s across Nevada and mid 20s or so, a little bit higher across parts of Utah. Transport winds light in the east, starting to pick up a little bit across the west and picking up from the south southwest across the mountains of central Idaho in response to that strong cold front that is approaching. The mixing heights, vertical mixing, looks really good in all areas. In the yellow, so at least 3 to 4,000 feet above ground level, so that is good. And you expect that with low pressure moving in. And Tuesday, that cold front merges with this deep low pressure area. Expect increasing chances of precipitation, where you see the areas in the green. Winds picking up elsewhere. You can see the 7-day on the right. You can see the strong winds. Tomorrow, a very windy day, probably out of prescription for many areas. Purples to pinks, basically transport winds in the 30 to 45 mile per hour range, so quite windy in just about the entire area. Humidity levels, you can see them here on the right-hand side, still driest in the far south. Mixing heights, again, very good as you normally would expect with the storm. And then the storm system is in full bore on Wednesday. Deep green means overcast skies, steady precipitation for just about the entire area. So all of our 7 days PSAs turn green. Humidity is quite high in all areas, above 30%, many cases above 40 or 50%. Still have those strong winds across the far southern and eastern portions of the Great Basin of 30 to 50 miles per hour. Somewhat lighter winds out of the west or northwest as you head further up into the Great Basin. Mixing heights, again, pretty good as you would expect. Now, the 3-day precipitation totals, a lot of this will be late Tuesday into Wednesday. You can see just about the entire area covered. Locally moderate amounts in the dark green and blues indicate 1/4 to 1/2 inch. Further down the road, that low pressure system deep, centered right over Vegas, and lots of significant precipitation shifting to the southern half of the Great Basin. That low moves out. Another similar frontal system, cold front approaching on Friday and into Saturday, pushes into the northern half of the Great Basin, basically north of the Highway 50 or I-80 corridor on Saturday. Strong winds, but moisture in at least the northern half or northern 2/3 of the Great Basin, which lingers on Sunday, dry and breezy further south. precipitation days 4 and 5, and then precipitation days 6 and 7. This is Saturday into Sunday with that next weather system, again, mainly north of the I-80 corridors where I expect to see that precipitation. 7-day precipitation totals, and the 8 to 14-day continues with that wetter than normal trend across much of the Great Basin, especially the northern areas, but just about everywhere. Wetter than normal and cooler than normal as well. So that may transition more towards pile burning, surface fuels, probably not having a prolonged period to dry out. Now, we look at overall smoke dispersion when we look at both the mixing heights vertically and the smoke transport winds horizontally, and this is what it looks like for today. The areas in yellow and white are the better dispersion areas. Once you get into the reds and especially the purples, that's when things are a little bit worse. And as you go to Monday, you can see Tuesday things really improve, as well as Wednesday with that storm system. Looks good again Thursday. Friday looks good. We start seeing some stagnation in the far west. Uh, Saturday, Sunday looks good. So really dispersion wise, we're looking pretty good this week, as would be expected during a storm system. This concludes our smoke briefing. Next one will be coming up this Wednesday, mainly for planning purposes. If you're planning a burn in the next couple of days or up to a week ahead, trying to give you a heads up of what's going on. Okay, that's about it. Have a great day.